Have you ever felt like you were born in the wrong time? Like you belong everywhere and nowhere at once? If you were born between 1976 and 1985, that feeling might not be random at all. You are part of a quiet in-between generation that researchers now call Xennials. And what makes this group different will change how you see your entire life story. Xennials grew up with rotary phones and handwritten letters before the internet rewired the world overnight. They remember recording songs from the radio and waiting days for photos to be developed. But they also adapted fast enough to build social media profiles before their parents learned to text. That strange double exposure created a psychology unlike any other generation before or after them. Here is where it gets interesting. Because Xennials were children of analog certainty and adults of digital chaos. They learned patience in a slow world, yet they built careers in a fast and unstable one. They were told loyalty mattered, then watched companies replace people with automation and apps. And that contradiction quietly shaped how they trust, work, love, and define success. Unlike pure Generation X, they were young enough to embrace technology without fear. Unlike Millennials, they remember a childhood without constant comparison and online validation. They understand both sides of the cultural divide, yet rarely feel fully understood by either. This constant translation between worlds can feel empowering, but it can also feel exhausting. Think about this for a moment and see if it feels familiar to you. You might feel comfortable using technology, yet secretly nostalgic for a slower and more personal life. You value independence deeply, but you also crave meaningful connection and stability. That internal push and pull is not confusion, it is the core of Xennial psychology. But wait till you hear this part, because the real tension begins in adulthood. When Millennials were labeled innovative and Gen X was labeled resilient, Xennials were mostly overlooked. They were often grouped into one side or the other, rarely recognized as a distinct identity. And being invisible as a generation can quietly shape how you see your own worth. Many Xennials became the emotional bridge between older and younger coworkers and family members. They translate slang for their parents and explain old references to younger colleagues. At work, they are expected to understand tradition while mastering constant technological upgrades. That invisible responsibility creates pressure that few people openly acknowledge. There is also a deeper emotional layer that most people never talk about. Xennials witnessed dramatic world shifts during their most formative years. They remember a childhood before major global crises reshaped security and opportunity. And stepping into adulthood during economic uncertainty left a subtle mark of caution and realism. What happened next for many of them is something that will surprise you. They developed adaptability as a survival skill rather than a trendy personality trait. They learned to reinvent themselves quietly without making noise about it online. But deep down, many still wonder where exactly they belong. And that question of belonging is where the true psychological story begins. Because when you do not fully identify with one generation or another, identity itself can feel unstable. You start asking whether your values are outdated or simply misunderstood, and that quiet identity tension shapes relationships, career paths, and even self-confidence. But this is only the beginning of the story. Because the way Xennials handle love, ambition, success, and failure reveals something even more fascinating. What you are about to hear next might completely reframe how you see people born in this era. In next part, we uncover the hidden strengths and surprising emotional struggles that define them. Now here is where the story turns from confusion to hidden power. Because the very reason Xennials feel out of place is also their greatest psychological advantage. Living between two worlds train their brains to think in layers instead of extremes, and that layered thinking makes them quietly powerful in ways most people overlook. Xennials are masters of adaptation because they had no choice but to evolve repeatedly. They shifted from paper resumes to digital profiles without losing their sense of professionalism. They learned to build real-world friendships and maintain online networks at the same time. That dual awareness gives them emotional intelligence that feels both grounded and modern. But wait till you hear this part, because their struggle with belonging also shapes their relationships. They crave depth and loyalty because they remember life before everything felt temporary. At the same time, they understand that change is constant and nothing stays stable forever. That mix can make them loving partners, yet cautious with their hearts. In careers, they often feel torn between security and freedom. They were raised to value stable jobs, steady promotions, and long-term commitment. Yet they entered a world that rewards flexibility, side hustles, and personal branding. So many of them carry quiet anxiety about whether they are doing enough or falling behind. Here comes the psychological twist that most people never notice. Xennials compare themselves not just to peers, but to two different generations at once. They look upward at Gen X for toughness and downward at Millennials for innovation. That double comparison can quietly erode confidence even when they are highly capable. And what happened next in many of their lives is deeply revealing. Some began redefining success on their own terms instead of chasing borrowed expectations. They started valuing balance, meaning, and mental peace over status alone. That shift marks the beginning of their psychological awakening, because when you stop trying to fit into someone else's timeline, something powerful happens inside you. You realize your unique position between eras gives you perspective that others lack. You can empathize with older generations without dismissing younger voices. And that bridge-building ability is desperately needed in a divided world. There is also resilience hidden beneath their quiet exterior. They survived economic downturns, technological revolutions, and social transformations during key life stages. They learned to adapt without announcing every struggle to the world. That silent endurance shaped a strength that is steady rather than flashy. But the most thrilling part of Xennial psychology is this. They are old enough to remember life before constant noise and young enough to navigate it skillfully. They can step back from digital chaos while still understanding how it works. That balance gives them a rare chance to live consciously instead of reactively. So if you were born between 1976 and 1985, listen closely now. You do not fail to fit in because you are confused or behind. You feel different because you were shaped by two powerful eras colliding at once. And that collision created depth, empathy, adaptability, and quiet strength. If this story felt personal, that is not an accident. Comment below and tell me whether you have ever felt caught between generations. Like this video if you want more psychology breakdowns that explain hidden identity struggles. And subscribe now, because the next insight might finally explain something you have felt your whole life.